Hello, welcome to the Shattering the Silence podcast or YouTube channel. This production is brought to you by the National Shattering Silence Coalition and The Rock. And The Rock is a recovery community organization, not just for people in recovery from addiction, but also in recovery from brain disorders, often referred to as mental illness, like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. And we do a lot of good trying to get people off the couch and into the community and having just a fun place to hang out and have meetings and get connected to resources. And that's what we do at recovery community organizations. At the National Shattering Silence Coalition, we help people like me who have a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder try to close gaps in the system and hold the system accountable. And we do a lot of good raising awareness. We're calling Shattering the Silence for a reason, because a lot of times people with schizoaffective disorder and not everyone can serve on a commission. Not everyone can serve on a commission. So when people say nothing about us without us, well, nothing about us without all of us. So we have a no one left behind approach. And The Rock and the National Shattering Silence Coalition share these goals. So The Rock is a local organization I belong to in Canton, Georgia. And the National Shattering Coalition is, of course, a national organization. And I had the privilege of talking to someone named Kerry Morrison not too long ago. Oh, also, please like and subscribe to this video. It helps us on YouTube's algorithm. And I had the privilege of talking to Kerry Morrison, and she does a lot of the same things that The Rock is doing in Georgia, but she does them in Hollywood, California. And the National Shattering Silence Coalition, we try to bring these people together. So I hope thank you again for watching. And like I said, please like and subscribe. And now, without any further ado, let's see the interview with Kerry. Hello, and welcome to the National Shattering Silence Coalition's YouTube channel. As you can see, I got a new place to record, so I'm very happy about that. And I'm also happy to have an advocate that I've been on a lot of Zoom meetings with over the past. And she does a lot of good. She's actually, I believe, in Hollywood, California. And she does a lot of good trying to help the same people that we're trying to help. So Kerry Morrison, good to have you.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Pleasure to join you.
Yes, thank you for being here. And one thing I have to ask, being that Hollywood has a mythical place in American culture, are you associated with the film industry in any way?
Not in any way. And to be honest, I've not been in a movie theater since before the pandemic also. So feeling a bit distant from all that.
All right. And you, how long have you lived in Hollywood?
So I lived a little bit south of Hollywood, and I've lived here since I took the job back in 1996 to manage at that time, the new business improvement district in Hollywood. I needed to get closer to that job. And prior to that, I lived in what we would describe in Los Angeles as the South Bay area. So Torrance, San Pedro, Palos Verdes, but it's a long commute to come to Hollywood. So moved up into this neck of the woods in 1999.
It's a long commute, but it's especially long with the traffic, the famous LA traffic.
Exactly. We don't talk in terms of miles. We talk in terms of time.
Time. I get that. Very similar to Atlanta. And describe your work with the Business Improvement District. Like, what is that?
So back in the 90s, cities all across America really experienced economic downturns, driven a lot by the suburbanization of the United States, where retail and businesses moved to America's suburbs, leaving downtowns a shadow of their former selves. And so this happened everywhere: New York, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Los Angeles, San Francisco, name any major urban city. So there was a movement in the 90s and early 2000s to begin to revitalize downtown districts. And the prime driver was to bring people to live into downtown, because back in the day, people would come to work and people would come to shop in their downtowns. But as shopping malls and kind of economic activity shifted in the United States, you had to repurpose what it is you would come into a downtown to do. So Hollywood, like many other downtowns in America, began to imagine a new vision for becoming more of a neighborhood where people could live and work. And, you know, Hollywood is definitely driven by a tourist economy, but there's also a very vibrant local economy. Mm-hmm. So I came in at the early stages of Hollywood's renaissance.
All right, well, that sounds great. And trying to improve and get people to come back from the suburbs, is that how you got involved with trying to help people with schizophrenia that are homeless?
So that, you know, I started that job in 96, and it was probably about 10 years later, 2006, 2007, that the homeless crisis, well, you can't even call it a crisis compared to what we're experiencing now, which is truly a crisis. But indicators that homelessness was beginning to become an issue in Hollywood and other downtowns was starting to surface. And we began to see people living on the street, or people who would be left to their own devices on the street. You know, back then there were no encampments. It had a different kind of sense to, you know, who was out on the streets. And so right around 2008, 2009, we formed a coalition. We called it Hollywood Forward. It stands for 4 walls, a roof, and a door, FWRD. And we began to put our heads together as to why we were seeing an increase in homelessness in Hollywood. And a lot of it was driven by increasing housing prices, people losing their homes, et cetera. But we began to become aware of what seemed to be a cohort of our homeless population were people with serious mental illness. And it really came to a head about 6 or 7 years later in 2013, when, after working for many years as a coalition to try to bring resources into Hollywood and to help people get housed, we realized that there was a certain group of people that no matter what, we could not get them helped. And we identified a list of 14 of them. We called them the Hollywood Top 14. And they were 14 the most vulnerable, seriously mentally ill people that, in our opinion, would be left to die on the streets of Hollywood unless we intervened in some way. And so that kind of began the journey for me. That was 2013. As we started
Could I interrupt for just one moment?
Yes, of course.
I'm going to share 2 links to videos at the bottom. And one of these gentlemen, Serge, and another one's name was Tori. But some of these homeless people, these are not just homeless, but unhoused people. Some of these unhoused neighbors, I guess, that Serge wasn't just homeless, and I'm assuming he had some sort of mental illness. He had physical disabilities as well, and he was just out there on the streets. And can you describe just trying to get help for someone? Talk about when you're trying to get help for these people. What was it like trying to get cooperation with your group from the mental health department?
Yeah, so definitely Tori and Serge are 2 people that, because I became pretty closely involved with their what I would call case study, they became that informed to me how our system was failing them. Tori was the first person in 2008. It was kind of my own personal desire to try to understand why this man, who had been pretty much sitting on the same bus bench for 8 months, never showered. Maybe he would walk a few blocks either way, rocking back and forth on a bus bench. I just didn't understand why no one would help him and why he would be out there for so long, and began to kind of initiate contact with him and circle him with some other social service providers, where we were able to little by little get him helped. And over time, I began to learn about things about the mental health system through his life. At one time in particular, it was later that year in 2008, where he disappeared for a couple of weeks and nobody knew where he was. And then suddenly he shows up, and I see him at the corner of Hollywood and Vine. He had just been dropped off from having been in a psychiatric hospital in the San Fernando Valley for a couple of weeks. He looked amazing. He was clean. His hair was cut. He was wearing new clothes. He was lucid. And he had in his hand a big bag of medication, massive containers of haloperidol and cogentin. And he had discharge papers from this hospital, and it said discharge to corner of Hollywood and Vine, diagnosis acute schizophrenia. And I was flabbergasted. I said, how is it that you drop a guy off at Hollywood and Vine with nowhere else to go and 500 pills of these really powerful psychosocial meds? And I guess it wouldn't be psychosocial meds, it's psychotropic meds, perhaps. Again, I'm not a clinician, so I'm everything I was learning. So that began that first journey. I called someone at the Department of Mental Health, and I said, how does this happen? How does this happen? So fast forward to 2013.
What was their response when you said that?
They didn't really have a response. And I would say back then, 2008, it was a whole different administration, and the Department of Mental Health really did not want to talk to members of the public. They would always throw up a HIPAA shield. Well, we can't talk to you about this guy. I said, well, I have his discharge papers here. This seems like patient dumping, as far as I can tell. So, I mean, Tori, I kind of went through every
Let me interject. HIPAA shields are often used to shun and dump patients. Like they'll stonewall. PBS had a great documentary called Frontline on PBS, had a documentary, The Right to Fail. And their excuse for not following up with the patients that were basically graduated, or graduated is a term when you discontinue someone's service. The people that were graduated and dumped from the adult homes, people would say, "Oh well, it's a HIPAA violation." Like, no, that's not why you're doing. That's just a shield, as you say. And also another thing that happens is the lack of acknowledgement. Trying to get someone on the phone to talk to was very difficult, because they just stonewall, don't want to. And then if they're forced to acknowledge it, it's often the case that they act like it's the first they've heard of it. And have you ever experienced that?
Of course, like what I experienced with Tori is that nobody in the entire county of Los Angeles felt accountable for him. He was not a member of a full service partnership at that time. He had no caseworker. He was just floating. I use that image of like a guy floating in space that's untethered to anyone or any system. That is often what happens with people in our mental health system. Now, over time, he eventually became conserved, and he had a conservator. And
what does it mean to be conserved?
So he degenerated or decompensated after hospitalization, and eventually it got to the point where he was unable to take care of himself, losing weight. He was defecating all over himself, sleeping in doorways, and the county eventually advocated for to be placed under a conservatorship as being gravely disabled, unable to care for yourself, for food, housing, basic needs. And he was placed under the care of the public guardian. And that's when I learned about IMDs. I went and visited him at the IMD on Avalon in South LA, it's Institute for Mental Disease. It's a locked facility. And in that place, he was able to start to recover again. He was under treatment. He was being fed. He was taking his meds. He was being seen by a psychiatrist. And I would go and visit him. I could take him to a movie. I could take him out for lunch or what have you. And eventually he was discharged from the IMD, which I think was appropriate, and he was placed in a board and care home in Hollywood. And in the board and care home, he was still under conservatorship, but eventually he contested it. I think a patient rights person in the board and care encouraged him to contest his conservatorship because, as you know, it comes up every year or so. And I was worried about that because I did not think he was capable of maintaining his regimen, maintaining his meds. And sure enough, he did decompensate again. This happened a couple times over the years, and it happened again as late as last year when living in the board and care, he stopped bathing, he stopped cutting his hair. He lost probably 80
I
pounds.
just want to interject real quick. The disability rights groups are taxpayer funded. So like if mom and dad fight to get their kid on their meds and go through the courts, they have to fight people that completely disappear when they decompensate.
Yeah.
Like when he decompensated, did you talk to the disability rights attorneys? Were they around when this happened?
No, that's such a great point. Neither the disability rights people or the ACLU was ever there to worry about the fact that he was losing weight and down to like 100 pounds and finally had to be placed under a 5150, determined gravely disabled again, and placed back into a psychiatric hospital. And, you know, it's just like, I'm just sorry to say that there are some people who are really on the whole spectrum of mental illness, and I would use my friend Tori as one of these people. He has acute schizophrenia, and he needs a lot of structure. He needs a lot of structure. He needs to have a very consistent visit from a case manager. He is part of a full service partnership now, and that is a good thing. I applaud them. He has a caseworker who actually will show up and take him for walks. I come see him also as much as I can. He's in another board and care, but I don't understand why there is a reluctance to actually place people into a treatment mode when they absolutely need it to restore them to health, nutrition, hydration.
I have a theory. A lot of people just identify as being radical, and they have this image of the 1960s and 1970s, one flew over the cuckoo's nest. And it kind of fits their self-image to fight the system. But some 80-year-old mother trying to get help for her son is an easy target. She can't really fight back. So you get to go be edgy and radical, but there's no consequences for you. You just go back, do your thing. It's like, yeah, I fought forced treatment. I'm done. And I think at this, like I said, I used to be really differential and just, I don't think they care. That's my view. And
in the case of Serge, it was a similar thing. You know, Tori by that time, you know, he was, I'm trying to think of where he would have been in 2013. My life with Tori goes back a long time to 2008. Of course, he's been a lot of places. But Serge was a person, he was the #1 person on our Hollywood top 14 list because he was missing hands. He had no hands. And so therefore he was usually barefoot most of the time because he had no on shoes, tying shoes. He had no way of putting a belt in his pants, so his pants were often falling down. He was missing an eye, and he had been homeless in Hollywood for over 12 years. And so we, as this lay group of Hollywood Forward, sat and we called ourselves Team Serge. It was, okay, let's figure out everything we can find out about Serge. You know, who is he? What's his full name? Where's his family? Where's he from? Has he had long interactions with the mental health system? Has he been incarcerated? And we couldn't get any real help from the Department of Mental Health. I remember we got help from the Santa Monica Police Department because they had a very compassionate homeless outreach team there. And one of their officers would meet with us and say, yeah, Serge will come on the bus to Santa Monica and he'll get arrested for trespassing on private property. And we want to help you help him. So we worked for months to establish what we called a dossier, figuring out who he was and the fact that we could determine that he had been hospitalized multiple times and released to the streets, had no viable way to, you know, take care of himself without hands. and made a plea to, on the day that we actually, he was arrested for 5150. He had been running into traffic. He was taken to the emergency room, and we pleaded, not me, but the team, the social workers pleaded with the ER doctor to please keep him for a full 72-hour hold. And then we pleaded with the doctors to keep him on a full 2-week hold, because to just keep releasing him was a recipe for disaster, if not death. And so that story was just remarkable in its evolution, because again, we experienced every corner of the system. He was placed under the care of a public guardian. He was placed in an IMD for about a year. His improvement was jaw-dropping, his improvement in that place. And he will say he was grateful to be placed under the public guardian. And he'll say to us, why did you wait so long to help me?
What's interesting about that comment as why did you wait so long to help me is I'm always amazed. Have you had a lot of interaction with peer advocates? I know you mentioned disability rights, but peer advocates, many of the peer advocates that I've encountered have never experienced, like I myself have schizoaffective disorder, and I experienced agisonosia. I was too sick to know I was sick. I honestly, a lot of the peer advocates, when I would speak, we were like so far apart, they had never experienced anything like I had. Like trauma, trauma is, of course, is bad. It's not the same as schizophrenia. And these people, like people that are capable of serving on a commission, don't always understand people that are unhoused on the streets and have schizophrenia. And a lot of times, their main goal is, in my view, is to keep these people from taking their services. Like they want these services for people able to live in the community. One person that needs to be in a hospital takes up services that can help a lot of other people that don't need that high level of care. And it's always infuriated me, not so much that they do it, but that no one calls them out on it. Like, why is someone who's trying to block someone from taking their service being able to speak on behalf of the person who they're trying to keep them from getting the service they need? And have you encountered any of this?
Well, I actually sat down with the ACLU probably around 2016, a couple of key people here in Los Angeles, and shared with them the story of some of the members of the Hollywood top 14, and asked what their view was, like how did they expect people would or should be helped. They did not have any good answers for me. And I remember one of the female attorneys, who's pretty well known in Los Angeles, she said something to the effect of, well, if people end up stabilizing and getting into housing, they might just stop taking their meds again. And I said, yes, that will happen, of course. We need to have people around them to try to forestall that or support them if that's the case. But I don't know what her point was. I got the sense that they were just flummoxed and they didn't have an answer.
So when things happen outside someone's moral values, philosophy, or expertise, you just try to make it fit. And then a lot of times I've noticed when people lash out because, like, okay, I'm a lawyer, I care about civil liberties, I have my talking points, and someone points out, and you point out that, well, this won't work, and you're hurting these people, or you're supposedly advocating for, they just get mad. Have you ever had anyone verbally, physically, or otherwise just like attack you?
Oh yes, I have. And it's come up because I know we're going to talk about Trieste, Italy, and how I'm such a fan of that remarkable system. And people will say to me, if I do a speech or a panel discussion, they'll say, how can you be such a supporter of the remarkably kind community-based system in Trieste, and yet you are still in favor of involuntary hospitalization? And I'll say, in Italy, they do not let people get as sick as we allow to happen in the United States. And so sometimes involuntary hospitalization is necessary to save someone's life.
And it's interesting that you say that, because if I have agisonosia and no one can intervene, it's going to get to the point where I would have needed the I would have needed a conserve to be conserved. Another thing, I am able to live I was never conserved. I was actually fortunate enough that I agreed to take my medication without ever acknowledging that I needed them until I was on a different medication. But like I said, as a cyanosia, lack of insight. But the problem is, I I honestly thought if I stopped taking them, I would be fine because the stuff I thought was going on, I still thought went on, but it just wasn't going on now. And Trias talks about radical hospitality. And I was in a clinical trial study at Emory University that I got paid $20 for showing up every 2 weeks. And they were just very nice to me. So even though I did not need the medication, I was still willing to take them it took 61 months for me. I'm not on it now. It took 61 months for me to get on Social Security disability. And $20 that's mine. I actually don't have to ask anyone for it. But the radical hospitality of Trist, that's what's necessary to get people to continue taking their meds. It's not like, well, they're going to go off their meds anyway, so let them rot on the streets. And Trist, talk a little bit more about the radical hospitality of Trist.
And it's Trieste.
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 Okay.
Yes, it's Trieste. It's a city in north of Venice, really close to the Slovenian border. So a lot of people haven't heard about it. But what's remarkable about this particular city, and it's recognized by the World Health Organization as a global best practice in community-based mental health care, is that in the 70s, there was a remarkable psychiatrist there, Dr. Franco Basaglia, and he was responsible for overseeing an asylum in a neighboring community. That asylum was called Gorizia, and then he ended up in Trieste. And he was really appalled by the conditions in the asylum, which of course was a driver in the United States also in terms of closing down the mental health hospitals in the country. But the difference was that he began to create a community-based system of care. So as people left the asylum, they would be fully accepted into and integrated into community life, which is a high regard for social inclusion and for destigmatization, for vocational opportunities, for not segregating people from the community, but fully integrating them. So I've been there 5 times, and I lived there for a month in 2019. I was introduced to Trieste through a study fellowship I had to look at different mental health systems. And when I try to tell people what is so different about it, it is a non-clinical model, and it's a non-hierarchical model. And it's hard for us to imagine this cultural inclination they have. But I like to say that they have horizontal relationships in Trieste, whereas in the United States, our relationships are very vertical and power oriented. So you have a psychiatrist, or you have your clinical social worker, or people who they're higher than you. You feel that they have answers or that they have some power over you. Whereas in Trieste, those relations between what they call the users of their system and the people who work within the system are horizontal. They come together as human beings to talk about and to negotiate the best way forward. The other thing that the secret sauce, like I was trying to define what is so unique about their mental health system, and it boiled down to me to what I call radical hospitality. There's an Italian word, accoglienza. I have a blog. I use accoglienza as the label for my blog, but radical hospitality, which would be the translation, is 4 things. So imagine like trying to approach interactions with people in our mental health system, checking off these 4 boxes. We see you, like we truly see you. We hear you. We really hear you. You are safe here, and your voice matters. And we have a hard time doing that in the United States. It's hard to do it at the dentist's office. It's not an American disposition to be like, we see you, we hear you, you are safe here, and your voice matters. But if you start to actually practice that intentionally, you start to see a softening of human relationships and an emergence of trust and rapport that allows you to move forward, whether you're a service provider, whether you're a, government official, whether you're a volunteer. That is the secret.
Describe the clubhouse you're building in Hollywood.
So I'm very excited that we are working to create a clubhouse in Hollywood. A clubhouse is certainly one of the inspirations that are associated with our desire to capture some of the guiding principles we saw in Trieste and implement them in Hollywood. And what is a clubhouse? It's something we don't have in Southern California, which is kind of shocking because there are 200 in the United States. And of course, the first clubhouse in America was Fountain House, created in the 1940s. And we are actually partnering with Fountain House to create this clubhouse in Hollywood. So what's exciting to me about the clubhouse is that for people living in our community, whether they're living in a affordable housing and supportive housing and board and care, whatever, this will be their place to go, a place where they will be welcomed and where they will build community, create friendships, pursue their recovery with peers who can come alongside them. They will have a sense of purpose because the clubhouse model is one where the members run the clubhouse. They are involved in decision making. They are involved in clerical work. They're involved in maintaining the clubhouse. They're involved in all the various work units that keep that operation going. So we are in the very early stages right now, partnering with with Fountain House. We've identified a pop-up space where we're going to start to invite people in while we look for a permanent location, and Fountain House is doing the fundraising. The clubhouse has been defined as Trieste within walls, and Trieste has been defined as a clubhouse without walls. And so I love that imagery of those similar principles going back and forth between this entity, but also this city that inspires us so much.
Peer support can be done right and it can be done wrong, but when done right, like the way you're describing, just sounds beautiful. And also, I have another question. Describe what the IMD exclusion is.
So the IMD exclusion, as I understand it, is a policy that was grounded in decisions made in the 1960s as the federal government was dismantling, as we talked about, the asylum system, the state hospital system, et cetera. And the intent was to avoid federal government financial support for psychiatric institutions as the states were picking up the slack as the federal government was devolving responsibility to the states. So the IMD exclusion pretty much suggests that you cannot have a facility of more than 16 beds where people are treated for experiencing psychiatric treatment and expect to have Medicaid reimburse for that treatment. So it has created a shortage of the type of psychiatric treatment beds that we really need in our communities in order to help, as we say, stabilize people, move them on to a greater potential for independence. And my impression and opinion would be, based on what I see on the streets and also what I see in LA County Jail, where I volunteer every week at Twin Towers, that because we have failed in providing treatment for people who need it, people are either homeless on the streets of Los Angeles, cycling through hospitals, or they end up incarcerated or.
And I often hear the term trans institutionalization, where they just transfer them to a different institution. And what I also find frustrating is there's data for the people in the hospital. That in itself is good. There's data for people voluntarily seeking services. It's very hard to get data on people with schizophrenia in the criminal justice system. And another thing, when someone with schizophrenia is in the Twin Towers, they're not on the mental health department's budget. They're on the sheriff's office or this LAPD's budget, and kind of out of sight, out of mind. And another thing, they're not counted when the National Institute of Mental Health says that undercounts people with schizophrenia. because they don't count people in jails and that are homeless. So it's one of those, like I say, mental health department's not acknowledging. It gives them a chance that someone who say is a super utilizer, when they're in jail, they're on a complete different, like it's almost like they're in a black hole. It's like they don't exist as far as they're concerned.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I didn't realize that that was not included in the larger data set.
No, but
Interesting.
if you, it's, yeah, it's, in fact, I'm going to have an interview later a week, in a week or two, with a woman who wrote an article on that. But yeah, a lot of this data that it's like the front door policy of, you walk in and ask for services and they're provided. Those people are counted, but the people that refuse treatment don't are there's a huge undercount of people with schizophrenia. And one of the reasons people that don't think they're sick are so desperate to get off their medication is a lot of people, the only medication they can take has horrible side effects. Well, if there was an accurate count, there'd be more federal funds doing research on these medications. But how,
Yeah, you know, the data on LA County Jail, which is seen as the largest mental health treatment facility in the country, which is just kind of odd that we would consider a jail a mental health treatment facility, but that is by default. They're the last man standing. You know, they always have a bed for you, unfortunately. But I think data from 2021 indicated that about 40% of the inmates at LA County Jail, a little over 5,000 inmates, have mental health conditions. And so therefore it has become a de facto facility. And I've been volunteering for about 18 months now, every week, in a series of pods that serve the most seriously mentally ill. They call them patients. They don't refer to them as inmates. They refer to them as patients because they are technically under the care of jail correctional health. And I will sit and talk with these patients about their life, going back to, tell me about where you were born and where you went to school. And invariably, there will be a through line as to something that happened in their early years, their teenage years, or 18, 19, where they started to manifest mental health conditions, hearing voices or other symptoms, but they had nowhere to turn to. No one would help them. Nobody noticed it in the school. They had no one to help them make sense of it. And a number of patients tell me that they didn't fully understand what they were experiencing until they got to jail, into this particular program where they are being taught about what it means to have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, how to manage it, why you take meds. And, you know, they're adults now. So it's such a failure of our system. As I mentioned a few moments ago, we let people decompensate to such a point that they either end up homeless or they could end up doing something that's going to land them in jail.
what is so frustrating about the failure in the system is just a complete lack of accountability in this system. Like, if this many people are winding up in jail, you would think that mental health departments would be like, hey, what's going on? If there's a gap in service, why aren't you on TV talking about it? Why are you just saying, hey, well, sucks for you, there's a gap in services? And I think that accountability for the system, but accountability for people within the system. Which, are you familiar with assisted outpatient treatment?
I mean, I'm familiar with the concept of AOT, and I'm familiar with the fact that states can apply that policy differently. Even
Mm-hmm.
counties in California can apply that policy differently. I have to be honest, like with all the work I've done, particularly with respect to people experiencing homelessness, I don't know that I've ever encountered anyone who's been in AOT. I think I've heard about it more in the context of families advocating that their loved ones might come under the purview of AOT, but it doesn't seem to have a big footprint in LA as far as I can tell, unless I'm
Oh,
missing something.
that's very common. I went to meet with the former mayor of Woodstock, Georgia, and I was like, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you about a program called AOT," and he said he had never heard of it, and it's underutilized. And I think what I love about it is, we have a video with the Honorable Judge Milton Mack of Michigan, And he talks about AOT. The reason he loves it is not just because it has accountability for the patient, but it has accountability for the system. So the mental health department could have to come before the judge and explain why the service was not provided. So, like, if someone who's too sick to know they're sick missed their appointment, well, what did you do to reach out to him? What did you do? And when it comes to the lack of accountability within the mental health system, is something that I'm very passionately about, and it's something that needs to be done. But also, when something's not being, like I said, if there's a gap in service, I'm out here doing a YouTube channel talking about gaps in service. Where is the mental health department? Why are they not on TV saying, hey, Serge has no hands. We can't get him into services. What's going on here? This man needs help. Or even, okay, HIPAA, there's HIPAA, there's a man with no hands that doesn't know he's sick on this. Instead of hiding behind HIPAA, I like I say the mental health department should be on here doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
And go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, I feel like there's been one of the programs or services in California funded by the Mental Health Services Act, but it starts to get at this is if some people have heard about the full service partnership. And that is intended to be an accountable case manager who will stick with their client through thick and through thin. And I've seen pretty good results with dedicated full service partnership caseworkers who will be available. You know, if they're not available around the clock, there will be someone that you can call when you're having a crisis. That just needs to be expanded, because that kind of back in the day when Serge was running up and down the streets for 10 years, nobody was losing sleep at night over the fact that they were somehow held accountable for his life. And it is kind of shocking. I mean, I learned as I've been researching California's mental health system that I really question why it is that the state of California dissolved its state department of mental health back in about 2011 and disaggregated all mental health services to the 58 counties. So each county in California can operate with a considerable amount of discretion about how they are going to allocate resources or take advantage of federal Medicaid reimbursements. And in so doing, there are no real outcomes that anyone bring to whether something is leading to a recovery path or something worse. So data, if you don't have data, then it's all invisible, as you pointed out earlier. It's all invisible.
Definitely. And describe Serge is a courageous man, and he agreed to share his story with the Aftermath Foundation. And he was the Aftermath. Actually, describe the Aftermath Foundation.
So, as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, Eric, when we put our little team together to try to figure out who Serge was and what his background was, so we could connect the dots on his life, which again is an essential thing you're going to do if you help somebody. You have to find their family, and that is not something that our normal public systems of mental health would do. They just wouldn't do because of the HIPAA shield. Things became clear for us when we started to do some research to figure out who his family was, where, his family of origin, connect the dots. And we were able to find out through internet research and other leads that we were given that he was born into the Church of Scientology. In the Church of Scientology, you have regular members, but then you also have their staff, their workforce, which is called the C organization. And the C organization, if you join the C organization, you sign a billion-year contract to pretty much be a lifelong or more than lifelong Scientologist. And it can be very, very oppressive for living under the terms and requirements and rules of the C organization. So Serge's parents were in the C organization, and he had two other siblings. So what apparently happened is that when he had an accident, probably age 18, 19, he was lighting firecrackers and they blew up, and they blew off his hands, and he lost his eye. He was hospitalized, and eventually his mother had to abandon him because that is the policy of Scientology, to disconnect family members. I guess they considered him to be a liability to the Church of Scientology. He was placed in an apartment for about a year, and then there was no rent anymore being paid for him, and he became homeless. The Aftermath Foundation is a foundation formed by a group of ex-Scientologists who raise money to help people not only escape Scientology, escape the Sea Org, but they also help people reestablish their lives once they get out of the Sea Org, because they have no ID, no driver's license, no credit history, no money. And so because the Aftermath Foundation was very aware of Serge's story, one or two members of the board actually knew Serge as a child when they were in the Sea Org as children. They raised money to purchase prosthetics to be able to restore some ability to manipulate his hands, which are stubs. Purchased a replacement glass eye. They replaced his teeth because his teeth had pretty much fallen out after years of not taking care of them. They bought him an iPhone so he could communicate. And as you'll see from the story that I sent you, he's been living in a board and care home now for several years after he came out of his conservatorship, and he started working on his GED. And the Aftermath Foundation helped him at the very end it was hard to pass the math test because that requires online learning, and it's hard who can learn math online? I would not be able to. They paid for a laptop and for a tutor so he could finally pass the GED, which is like a huge accomplishment for him. So I am in awe of their humanitarian spirit, and were it not for the Aftermath Foundation, he would not be where he is right now.
All right. And another thing you mentioned, getting in touch with the families. And what was so infuriating to me when I forgot where I read it, but there was an article written about the closing of the state hospitals in California in the 60s. And their goal for the discharging the patients was their families they just transfer responsibility to the families. Well, the majority of families are not able to, and it's one of those things. Getting in touch with the families is something that is vital, but I feel like part of the problem that families run into is they can often offer support but not housing and not 24-hour care. Like me, I work a lot of hours. I can't always provide that 24-hour care. And when you talk about the dedicated case manager, the biggest fear that families like mine, like I also have a brother with schizophrenia, the biggest fear is what happens when I'm gone. And having a dedicated case manager that holds the system accountable and doesn't just try to act surprised when you say, hey, there's a gap in the system, or try to just cook the data is so vital. And getting in touch with the family also can help when someone's at the hospital, because a lot of times if someone has had it, people with schizophrenia have an extremely high suicide rate. And but to see, do they have a family history of suicide? Have they ever attempted suicide? So if they're at the hospital, you can get that data get that support from the family without it turning into oh well, he's your brother, your kid, you provide the housing. And that's something that I think is really great that you do that. And also I think it's also a great just inspiration and role model that if we see someone in our community, okay, HIPAA protects his medical information, but if I'm talking to someone in psychosis and I can see that he's been homeless for the past year, there's no HIPAA rule. I am an addiction counselor, but I'm not talking to him in my professional capacity. I'm just talking to him. I have a right to comment on that. I have a right to go before someone and say, hey, this is wrong of what we're doing to him. And it is us doing it to him. He's too sick to know he's sick. And we don't just have a right to intervene. We have an obligation to intervene as human beings.
I think what has happened, Eric, is that I think the workers in our mental health system, and God bless them. I mean,
Mhm.
my husband likes to say there are no bad people, just bad systems, right? So the system is really hard to work in because the rules are so constricting. So, but gosh, if we could release people from these systems, I think they would feel liberated. But I think what caseworkers, social workers, FSP case managers, whatever, find challenging is that if they were encouraged to connect with the family might make demands on them. The family now is another person they have to consult with or talk to. And there's benefits, like you say, I mean, the family might be able to provide birthday cards or a little bit of spending money, or take
Yeah.
that person home for Christmas. There's some positive things that can happen, or give you, health information that would help understand maybe a health challenge they're having. But I think our system doesn't want to be complicated by having more people in the mix. And whereas in Trieste, Italy, families are part of the team, because we would talk to the psychiatrists from Trieste. They would say, how can you possibly serve a person without knowing their family, talking to their family? It's like,
Mhm.
well, that's what we do in the United States.
Also, by not talking to the family, I'm going to raise Cain if my brother is not getting the services he needs.
Right.
And you don't want the family involved, because if you're like, okay, we want to focus on a broader, we want to help, say, 100 people and not spend that money and resources and time on one person. Well, yeah, that makes sense on paper, but you're still abandoning that one person. And families tend to speak up a little bit more when they're involved. And that's something that, yes, I do acknowledge. I do work at a substance abuse treatment center. I acknowledge that it is a very difficult job, and families are not always helpful. But it is good when like I say, having that accountability of a family member, like, hey, what's going on here? And these are things that, and there are, like I said, I work with a lot of hardworking, dedicated people that care deeply about people with substance abuse and mental illness. And there are things within the system that are not just individual, because there are things that I physically can't do as a counselor at a treatment center. But also, though, describe in Hollywood, how many encampments would you say are in Hollywood, California?
I'm not sure if I have the current number. It's gotten better than it. The pandemic was really a challenge because the CDC recommended that encampments not be broken up because they did not want to lead to the expansion of COVID. Nobody really, in those early days, we didn't really know what the contagion was all about. And so we had just an absolute retrenchment of encampments, not only in Hollywood, but all throughout Los Angeles. I would say that our mayor is a hero, Karen Bass. She's the first mayor in all the years I've worked in the city of LA that has had the courage to actually set a goal, a numeric goal, to bring people off the street. And, that takes political courage, because it's not easy. And she's willing to talk frankly about how challenging it is, but slowly but surely, they are dismantling encampments and bringing people inside. One of her big pushes is something called Inside Safe, which is bringing people rooms. But I would argue that people with serious mental illness and also serious substance use disorders, which we're seeing unfortunately on the streets of LA also, are not going to make it alone in a hotel room.
Mm-hmm.
And this is worrisome for me. I do think we need a different kind of highly structured congregate setting with, it's always a joke, I go into permanent supportive housing with our radical hospitality initiative. And it's like, I don't see, where are these robust wraparound services?
Oh yes, housing first. They're always hearing about housing first and the robust wraparound services.
Like,
And you're saying you're not seeing them.
Not seeing them, right? So we have got to, and I think our mayor is recognizing this, that you just cannot put someone in a hotel room who is who's in need of a significant intervention and treatment, and probably some peer support,
Mm-hmm.
and staying in a community as opposed to being isolated. And I know that they're talking about different ways to approach this, but it's worrisome to me that that has not been figured out.
Yes, and also with schizophrenia, it is wrongfully labeled a mental illness. It is a neurological condition, and I believe that to be true. And it's like any neurological condition, like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, the longer it's left untreated, the quicker it progresses and the worse it gets. Someone who's been off their who has brain damage might not be able to live in an apartment. They might be able to live in an apartment, but they're going to need much more support. And housing first, when I hear people talk about housing first, they always say, "Oh, there's going to be robust services." Well, but if they're not there, then it's not going to work. It's not work in practice that they're not there. And someone who needs services, dying of an overdose or in a out of sight, out of mind, it's not helping them.
No,
And
and
another,
I have a real passion for this part of the story because in California, and this would be in any state, I'm sure, I don't know what the name would be, but we have supportive housing. That's a federally defined type of housing, permanent supportive housing for people who are previously homeless. But we also have a system of what's described as adult residential facilities or board and care homes. These are typically homes where your meals are provided, your laundry is provided, there's medication dispensed. So it is a higher level of structured care for people who would find it difficult to live alone in an independent apartment. But our board and care system in California is extremely challenged. It's underfunded, underappreciated, and we are losing board and care homes at an alarming clip. So what is happening is that people who otherwise would be most appropriate for the structured environment of a board and care or licensed facility are being plugged into permanent supportive housing, which does not provide the level of service that they need.
so it's the old make the patient fit the program, not make the program fit the patient.
Exactly.
All right. And that's awful. But yeah, it's so interesting because I talked to people like you in Hollywood. I spoke to a woman in Iowa City, New Orleans. It's the same thing all over the country. It's heartbreaking, but like I said, hopefully people will see this and think, hey, this is not specific to my community. And like I said, I've learned a lot from you talking about the Hollywood 14, and hopefully we can kind of spread the word and just validate and give people the confidence they need to speak up. And I got two more things with our time left. So on both sides of the street on Hollywood Boulevard, where Serge was living while he was homeless, are owned by the Church of Scientology. Is that correct?
Well, he was homeless pretty much on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, where there are 5 major properties owned by the Church of Scientology. So yes, they would have seen him every day up and down the sidewalk.
Okay, they would have seen him. They knew he was there, but also they are known for their private security, their private detectives, and there's no encampments on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
There's no encampments anywhere near a building owned by the Church of Scientology.
Okay, so that is something, because people that, of course, the Church of Scientology is very anti-psychiatry, but they have people that can be very principled about AOT conservatorships always find a way to have their own private order and kind of just let the people let everyone else deal with it. And then one more thing, what would you like to see done in your community, the state, and the state? I know California has a lot of stuff going on with the care courts. They just changed the conservatorship laws. What would, if Governor Newsom were going to listen to this, what would you say needs to be done?
Well, great question. Well, first of all, I compliment him on actually taking leadership in the last 2 years, and Senator Eggman and others who have recognized that the status quo has really contributed to the crisis that we're seeing on our streets. And though they have been criticized for some of the actions taken this year with the evolution of the care court system and the passage of SB 43 to expand the definition of grave disability and the repurposing of some of the Mental Health Services Act funds next year to a bond issue, which will actually allow for the creation of, thousands upon thousands of new types of treatment beds along an entire continuum of our mental health system. I would say that is all headed in the right direction. The two thoughts I would have are this, like in Trieste, what makes their system work so well is that it's not tied to a Medicaid reimbursement system. They are not tied to a medical model. The psychiatrist will sit and talk with you for 30 minutes about your desire to go back to a job and help you overcome whatever anxiety you have to take a test or how you're going to pay for it. They would consider that part of their work as a psychiatrist. Of course, in the United States system, psychiatrists are not paid to listen to anybody. Everything is about a 15-minute
chart, say hi, exactly. Give you the prescription.
So we are never going to get ahead of the game unless we actually radically rethink how we use our federal Medicaid system. And we need to move toward a more psychosocial support for people, because it is what is necessary to help people begin to thrive in the community. And the second thing is on this concept of the residential facilities where we are losing them. I would plead with the state and with our counties to stop the hemorrhage of these facilities and to shore them up financially, but then rethink what is the new business model that would allow people to enter into this type of housing and actually create, fund them enough so they can actually create a hospitable, safe environment. So those are two things that I would say to the governor if I had a chance, and I hope he listens.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And one thing, the goals are so important, because I was on disability for most of my adult life, and I'm not on it now. And it would have been very difficult to just say, oh, well, stress will cause you to go to the hospital. The hospital, people with cancer or heart, only people with psychiatric or brain disorders like schizophrenia are taught that the hospital is bad. I would much rather have rejoined the workforce, and if that was my goal, and risk being so stressed out I went to the hospital and starting over again, then be like, oh no, we can never get stressed out and go to the hospital. But also, yeah, recovery is possible. Like if your goal is to return to the workforce and your goal is to get your GED, like Serge, you can still do that and take your meds. You can still have the connection, and the medication doesn't keep you from doing that. And in fact, it makes you able to do that, because I'm able to do more stuff. I would say my medication gave me control. I was completely I was completely a prisoner of an illness. I had no control, no sense of self, and the medication gave me myself back. So sometimes when people need help or coercion getting on their meds, like Serge said, why'd you leave me out there for so long? And these things are vital. And it's not that if someone has to go to the hospital, when they're ready to go to a less restrictive level of care, that's great. It needs to be, but it doesn't need to be the corner of Hollywood and Vine. It needs to be the boarding care, like you're talking about. Like,
right.
I understand that.
It's funny that you bring that up, because I did happen to see Serge today. I was over at his board and care for another reason. And he came up, he was very excited. And he said that yesterday, a friend, a former Scientologist, took him to SeaWorld with her family. He told me all about it, how amazing it was and everything he ate, and, the killer whale aquarium. And then he specifically said to me, I said, oh my, that's a long day. You went all the way to San Diego. And yeah, when I came back, it was too late to take my meds. And he was like really concerned about it. I said, oh, well, what happened? He goes, well, I made sure I took them this morning. And I thought, wow, that is so interesting that it has been baked into his life habits now, that he was conscious of that, that he sees that as just part of his life regimen. And so, wow.
Well, yeah, Serge, another thing he talked about, I thought I was a movie extra for 7 months, So I thought that was neat that we were both movie extras. And all right. Well, Kerry, thank you for all that you do. And thank you everyone for watching. We have a link to the National Shattering Silence Coalition website down below. And we're gonna have a link to some of the videos we mentioned. And Kerry, like I said, thank you for all you do. Thank you for speaking with me, and keep doing what you're doing.
Eric, thanks. You're an inspiration as well. And I really feel privileged to be part of your podcast.
Thank you.